Is the emergence of strong parties in Congress a positive or negative development? No one thinks a dysfunctional Congress is a good thing, but some argue that strong parties in the long run are beneficial. In the days when the parties were internally divided, it was hard to hold parties accountable in that major bills were passed or defeated by a combination of Republican and Democratic lawmakers. Which party should the voters credit when the policy turned out well, and which should it blame when it turned out badly? It was hard to know. Clear-cut parties clearly make it easier for voters to make that judgment. Clear-cut parties make it easier for voters in another way as well. Voters have a better idea of their options when going to the polls. That's typically been the case for European parties. Historically, their platforms have been clearly defined, partly because of party control at the top, and partly because Europe has multi-party systems. When there are three or more parties, the parties have a stronger incentive to differentiate themselves from the others. In a two-party system, on the other hand, the parties sometimes blur the separation line in order to appeal to moderate voters in the center of the political spectrum. But American parties in recent years have increasingly resembled those in Europe, sharply defined and increasingly nationalized in the sense that each party's elected officials, whatever their state or district, hold similar policy views. That eases the voter's task when picking between the parties at the polls. But it can come at a cost in terms of governing. The U.S. governing system is not like a European parliamentary system. There, political power is unified. The Prime Minister, as the leader of the majority party, heads both the legislative branch and the executive branch. In the U.S., power is divided between the House, Senate, and President. Each has to agree before a law can be enacted. When the framers wrote the Constitution, they separated the powers of government in this way for the purpose of fostering compromise among competing interests. By dividing power, they sought to force lawmakers to take opposing interests into account and bargain to reach agreements that would reflect a wide range of interests rather than the desires of a single powerful faction. The framers did not anticipate or intend for the separation of powers to be an instrument for bringing government to a standstill, but that's what we've seen with some frequency in recent years. One reason is that control of government has often been divided. About 2/3 of the time since the 1970s, control of the House, Senate, and presidency has been split between the Democratic and Republican parties. In earlier times, that split was the exception. But even when one party controls the Senate, House, and presidency, deadlock has sometimes resulted. That's because Senate rules require a 3/5 majority to end a filibuster. The majority party in recent decades has rarely had the required 3/5 of Senate votes to end a filibuster. Not surprisingly, the filibuster has become the minority party's instrument of choice in the Senate. Use of the filibuster has reached historical highs in recent years. It has been employed 10 times more often than it was even 4 decades ago. In other words, strong congressional parties present a mixed picture. They have the advantage of sending clearer signals to voters, but the disadvantage of making it easier for one party or the other to block the government from acting, even on pressing national issues.